Prepare to experience the strongest radio allowable by law. Secrets will be revealed. Myths dispelled. From the studio gym where excuses never apply, it's Superhuman Radio with your host, Carl Lenore.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Superhuman Radio. I have to lift my hat because I'm wearing a hat because I need a haircut so badly. The girl who used to cut my hair is having surgery, so I've been putting it off. And I look like Kramer from Seinfeld right now. So I'm wearing a hat, but it's casting a shadow on my face. Anyway, we have a great show planned today. We're going to be talking about vitamin D and sun exposure. Can't talk about vitamin D without discussing sun exposure. And we're going to talk about it in the context of a possible therapeutic approach to this current pandemic. It's really being ignored, and I don't understand why. I actually wrote about this back in March 2020, and the idea that we don't have a greater discussion playing out in science about vitamin D3, sun exposure, and this pandemic is baffling to me. I think it'd be baffling to anyone looking at this logically. But before we get started, we have to thank our title sponsor, Legendary Foods, makers of the Tasty Pastry. The Tasty Pastry started out to be a Pop-Tart alternative, and it's become so much more. It's delicious. You'll eat them because they are delicious. You will swear you're eating pastry from your local bakery. But it's got less than 1 gram of sugar, 20 grams of high-quality protein, comes in amazing flavors. Your kids will love them. We have evidence of that. Everybody who gets them, who has young children at home, says they can't keep them in the house because the kids go through them so fast. If you go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary, you can save 10% off your order. Or if you listen during the commercial breaks, you'll hear a secret word hidden in the commercial break. Email it to onair@superhumanradio.net. Include your mailing address. And Legendary Foods will not only send you tasty pastries, but a bunch of other goodies that they make, all sugar-free or very, very minimal amounts of sugar. Seasoned almonds, flavored nut butters, all great stuff. Again, 1 per household, please. I get people who keep sending more and more in, and they've gotten sample packs already. That's not fair to the rest of the people. Excuse me. Okay. Now, without further delay, bring my guest on. Dr. Lina Zgaga, or Professor Lina Zgaga from Trinity University in Ireland. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Carl. Delighted to be here.
So, you recently published a paper looking at vitamin D3, the role of vitamin D3 in having a protective effect in this current viral pandemic. It seems to me that this is so obvious. Why isn't science grabbing a hold of it?
It's a very good question. So I started research in vitamin D in 2009, and I was trying to find answers, and I was deeply surprised when I realized that there weren't any answers. So even for very obvious diseases and vitamin D, like we kind of still don't have the level of evidence that we'd like. So when pandemic kicked off and became obvious, to everyone that there actually is a serious pandemic, we kind of wanted to see if there's anything within our kind of research expertise that we could do to kind of contribute to the debate. So what we then, identified as a exposure of interest was vitamin D. And the problems are when you're going to start kind of thinking what will you do, it's hard to define exactly what you mean when you start talking about vitamin D, because you can be talking about vitamin D supplementation, so trying to figure out whether those who take vitamin D supplements, are they doing better or worse? Or you could be talking about vitamin D status. So are those who are more vitamin D sufficient, are they doing better compared to those who are vitamin D deficient? So that would be like the two easy ones, which we still haven't nailed, but they would be the easy ones. But then we can layer over the kind of downstream effects of vitamin D. So for example, we have the vitamin D receptor, which would be a very important protein, which binds vitamin D as a ligand to then become a very active transcription factor. And what this means is that vitamin D regulates transcription of multiple genes. So whether you have, whether you're expressing more or less of a particular set of genes will be determined by your vitamin D status. But then it will also be determined by how active your vitamin D receptor is and many other things. So we're going to go back to where we were. So maybe summertime last year, we decided that we wanted to contribute to the debate. And we wanted to generate evidence that would be strongest evidence that we're able to generate. So ideally, everybody would always like to just do a huge randomized controlled trial, and then we can kind of rely on this as the strongest evidence that we can get. But obviously, with the pandemic happening, no time to kind of design a trial and let it run for 2 years. We wanted to do something kind of quick. And one of the research approaches which became quite popular over the last maybe 5 years is something which we call Mendelian randomization study. So we decided that we are going to go with Mendelian randomization study. And the benefit of doing that is that it enables us to overcome the issue of confounding. So confounding is actually a big problem in vitamin D research. And what this means is that we're trying to figure out whether vitamin D can protect against COVID, but there may be something else which is very strongly linked with both vitamin D and COVID. And then if we're just to quickly do a statistical analysis, it may appear that vitamin D is linked with COVID, but if we're not kind of taking into account this third factor, we are getting basically a biased picture. So it may be that the third factor is kind of affecting both. So in vitamin D and COVID situation, for example, BMI would be something which is very strongly linked with COVID, but equally it would be very strongly linked with vitamin D. So those who are, who have higher BMI, they tend to have lower vitamin D levels. It's
but studies have shown that people who are obese, they require more vitamin D. Somehow the body it disposes of it too quickly. But there was a study about 4 years ago that showed that obese people needed more D3 to see the same effects. So there you go. So that correlates. Okay.
The way we think about obesity or even just overweight is that an individual who is obese and an individual who is normal weight, they may have the same amount of vitamin D in their body, but because vitamin D is fat soluble, basically fat tissue kind of takes in, proportionate amount of vitamin D.
Right.
So even though there may be, the same amount of vitamin D, the concentration is lower. And then all of the downstream effects of vitamin D would also be worse. So I was actually surprised to see that some of the guidelines provide different dose recommendation for overweight and obese individuals, and I would definitely, think that that's the right thing to do. Okay, so basically confounders such as BMI or age, we also know that older individuals are more likely to be vitamin D deficient. So if you have an older individual who is at higher risk of COVID, but we also know that, by default, they will also have a lower vitamin D status, it's kind of hard to disentangle what is actually affecting the COVID risk.
Right.
So that's why we wanted to do a Mendelian randomization study, because what this entails is that we look at genes which have been associated with vitamin D level. So now we have over 130 different genetic kind of SNPs that have been linked to vitamin D. So we can do a vitamin D genetic risk score. So by looking for each person, by looking at all those individual genetic locations, we can kind of give them a score. So some people will be genetically likely to be vitamin D deficient, and other people will be kind of genetically likely to be vitamin D sufficient. And we are kind of making an assumption that genes aren't linked to this whole like large list of other factors which are linked with vitamin D. So, genes won't be, linked with your age, or won't be linked with, where you live and things like that. Now, the problem, there's always a problem. So the problem with Mendelian studies and Mendelian randomization studies on vitamin D is that we can only explain a very small portion of variance. So if we look at all of those 138 genetic locations, we can still explain only a tiny fraction of somebody's actual vitamin D status. And this tiny fraction is like maybe around 4% in our case. So what that kind of means is that our instrument, so our genetic instrument, isn't very strong. So in order to kind of try and improve on that, we decided that we will also look at the ambient UVB. So that we will take basically sunshine into account. Now, there's been, thousands and thousands of vitamin D papers published every year. So for the last maybe 20, 30 years, like the field is just like booming. But to my surprise, sunshine tends to be ignored.
Yeah, I know.
And it's kind of difficult to understand, because many research papers start by saying that sunshine would be the most important source of vitamin D for majority of individuals, but that's where discussion ends. So we kind of didn't want to turn the blind eye to the sunshine. So we decided
I would argue that vitamin D supplementation may be an acceptable alternative in cold seasons where there isn't a lot of sun exposure. But so much more is happening in the skin during sun exposure that we can't explain just by looking at vitamin D3. For instance, when postmenopausal women and depression was viewed, they gave women very large doses of intramuscular cholecalciferol. And they said, their depression scores stayed the same. And, and so we look, D3 is magic, but so much more is happening in the skin than just D3 synthesis. And the idea that we can take a pill and eliminate this evolutionary selection pressure for millions of years is quite naive, I think, on people's part.
When I think about, people today, like I very much, think we should enjoy sunshine. And now it's always easy to think in terms of black and white. So, nobody's recommending that people should be outside in the sun until, they get severely sunburned. So obviously, everybody should be in the sunshine for the amount of time that is ideal for them, which I guess boils down to kind of personalized, healthcare and personalized medicine. Now, when we compare people before, like we worked outdoors, when we travel from one place to another, we were outdoors. Like now all of that is changing. So we travel in our cars or buses or trains, we are indoors, we work indoors, spend lunchtime hours.
It's worse than that. We have dermatologists around the world telling people to slather themselves with sunblock 24 hours a day, because, and this may be one of the most destructive things that dermatology has brought to the population. We have evolved under the influence of the sun, and skin cancer is not caused by the sun. It's caused by diet. We've done shows that prove this. And so the sun is an unwilling participant in the development of skin cancer. But we can't ignore millions of years of us being exposed to sun. And now all of a sudden, the sun is evil. It's bad. It's nonsense. And a lot more people are developing unnecessary illnesses from their fear of the sun. And as you point out, I lived in Arizona. I lived in Las Vegas. We didn't get in the sun unless we went and laid out by the pool, because you go from your underground parking lot to your car to another underground parking lot to your office. And if people aren't exposed to sun anymore, we avoid it.
Yeah. And I think the pattern of exposure is very different. So, if you kind of imagine people, whatever, 200 years ago, it was winter, sunshine was very weak. Then there was spring and it was slightly stronger. You spend your days outside, your skin was getting used to it. Then it was, late spring,
Yes.
sunshine was even stronger. So kind of in a way you had time, like your skin had time.
Yeah, you ease into it. You ease into it. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So if you spend the whole day outside in the middle of July, that was kind of fine because you were prepared. But like what we do now, we spend all of our life indoors. You kind of, I don't know, 5 minutes between supermarket and the car, maybe you spend outside. But then we go on a holiday and then, we spend 3 weeks in like super high heat, like completely out of the blue, kind of shocking the whole system. So I think that's also, kind of.
Well, I think another confounding element that is not acknowledged by medicine, by science today, is those of us who evolved, those of us with dark skin, our ancestors evolved under great exposure to the sun. So evolutionary selection pressures increased the melanin in our skin because we needed to be protected from overproduction of D3. Then you move us to climates where there's seasons and we're not in the sun hardly at all. And when you supplement with D3, like I have to take 15,000 IUs of D3 a day just to get into the high middle ranges of what is considered healthy 25 OHD levels. Why? Because I have more D3 binding protein, because my ancestors had to be protected from overproduction. Now you take someone like yourself, you're very fair skinned. You can probably sit in the sun for a half hour and produce 20,000 IUs of vitamin D. I have to sit in the sun all day to produce 20,000 IUs of vitamin D. So science ignores the individuality, the uniqueness of each person. They just say, oh, don't take more than 1,000 IUs of vitamin D. That's not going to do anything for me.
Yeah. I mean, I very much agree. Like my number one recommendation would be a personalized approach. And like personalized approach, includes everything. It includes your genetic makeup, which will be, maybe regulating your vitamin D binding protein levels. It may be, that somebody else's vitamin D receptor doesn't work as well, so they may need more. It will take into account your lifestyle. So, how do you live? Where do you work? How much time to spend outside? Like, is it winter? Is it summer? But we're kind of trying to very much shoehorn everybody into this like one number. If you are big, if you're small, if you're male, if you're female, if you're, older, if you're younger, like we're gonna trying to come up with one number, which I don't see, why it needs to be like that. So, I mean, I myself was disappointed with the amounts of vitamin D that I make in the sun. So unfortunately, I need to get my supplements as well. But again, like learning about yourself, learning, about your vitamin D levels, and then figuring out the right approach, that would be ideal.
Well, and I actually have I have an idea. I have a potential. I've talked about it for years on this show. So for me and for other people to find their sweet spot, and everyone's sweet spot is different. One of the things you can look at is parathyroid hormone. So when you are not getting enough vitamin D3, then the parathyroid must make more of the hormones that control calcium to make sure it stays in the bones. When you start taking vitamin D3, if doctors would test not only for 25-hydroxy, but also for calcitonin, I think the other one is calcitrol. These are hormones produced by the parathyroid. In the absence of vitamin D, they try to keep the calcium in the bones. When you reach that sweet spot of D3, the parathyroid hormones will drop as you increase your D3 levels. They will drop. When they get to a point where you increase your D3 and they don't go any further, then back up and stay there. Because then the D3 is doing its job. but you're not taking more than you need. That's my own opinion. I think that doctors need to look at 25-OHD and parathyroid hormones to zero in the unique sweet spot for you versus me. What do you think about that?
It makes sense. I see the point. Like calcium and hypercalcemia, that would be probably the only, serious side effect of getting too much vitamin D. I think that a lot of confusion comes from the fact of how do we define vitamin D deficiency. So if one is now to go and try to find ideal, the kind of strongest research paper on this, it would probably be the one by Institute of Medicine, maybe issued to 2011, I think it was. But there would be like absolutely a huge amount of criticisms following that recommendation because it was felt that it was like definitely insufficient. So basically now we kind of use that as some kind of guideline, but then the other agencies would kind of create their own guidelines. How do we define? So like what is the cutoff that we kind of call vitamin D deficiency? And the kind of thing that tails onto that and onto the parathyroid hormone is that when we talk about vitamin D and protection of different diseases, we are talking about a long list of diseases. So we are talking about, rickets, which would be, the basic one. That's how vitamin D probably, first came on the scene, or bone health kind of more generally.
Mm-hmm.
But then now we have, cardiovascular health, we have infections, we have autoimmune disease, we have, dementia. So like we have, depression. So the list like kind of suddenly includes, all of the diseases kind of more or less. The curious thing is that it's reasonable that the optimal vitamin D level doesn't need to be the same for all of them.
Right.
So currently we think that for, bone health, that actually the bar is the lowest. So if we were to define vitamin D deficiency to prevent bone health, maybe 50 nanomoles per liter are like more than enough. Right. But there is some kind of, opinions now that to have protection against cancer, that we may need kind of, much more than that. So say over 100 nanomoles per liter. So just like another layer of confusion. The idea of parathyroid hormone, that would be an advanced, approach. Right. The simpler approach, which we aren't doing, would be just to monitor someone's vitamin D status over time. So like getting a single time point measurement of vitamin D is not of much value. Right. So if you get your vitamin D in March, you are almost certainly going to be deficient unless you're taking supplements, in the northern hemisphere. Equally, if you take your vitamin D in August, like that's kind of probably going to be, the best point in the year. So like, the first thing to do would be to kind of know your low point and know your kind of high point to kind of get the oscillation that you're experiencing. Because as you've been saying, depending on our ability to produce vitamin D in the skin, our body shape, the pattern will be different. So overweight individuals, they're disadvantaged in that they need more to kind of maintain healthy concentration. But then the flip side of that is if an overweight individual goes into winter, the fat tissue is slowly going to be releasing vitamin D, and very lean individuals kind of don't have that benefit because they don't have vitamin D kind of stored. So the amplitude will be different, but personalized approach like for that for sure.
So when I wrote this blog post in March of 2020, urgent, the link between sun exposure and coronavirus, there were a couple fascinating things I learned when doing the research to write this blog. The first one was that scientists already know that vitamin D3 stops the replication of any retrovirus. This study was done in patients with HIV, and they showed that a single dose of vitamin D dropped the viral load by 75% in days. And that's because something about D20, and it was 25 hydroxy. They pointed out it was a 25 hydroxy that was at work, because the higher the 25-OHD levels were, the greater suppression on viral load. And this current virus is a retrovirus. It uses reverse transcriptase to reproduce in your cells. And we know that vitamin D3 can reduce the viral load of HIV. Like I was astonished by that. I was like, why didn't I know about this? I hope everybody who has HIV is taking mega doses of vitamin D3 to stay alive. And maybe they are. Maybe they knew this and I didn't, because I don't have that condition. But the other thing that was most fascinating to me was a study on the country of Brazil. So I was putting together like vitamin D, retroviruses, sun exposure, because sun exposure is the king. It's much better than taking D3. And I don't care what anybody says. I mean, I'd love to sell D3 supplements, but I would much rather see people lay in the sun more often. So the country of Brazil, the northernmost portion is right on the equator. The southernmost portion is quite far away. The continent is about as big as North America. It's long. Now, traditionally, viruses spread in highly concentrated population areas. We're talking about the cities, and not in the rural areas, in the farming areas. But the north of Brazil is where all of the big cities are, by the equator. All the farmlands are south. They have the exact opposite phenomenon there. Viruses don't spread in the north as easy as they do in the south. And you know, and you can't ignore the role of sun when you start putting together vitamin D3 and it's metabolites. You know, LL37, which is a very popular antiviral, antimicrobial peptide being used by people today, is a downstream metabolite of 25-OHD. And so when you look at Brazil, it makes you wonder, wait a minute, maybe the reason that the flu season starts after the leaves start falling is because the sun goes away. And in the summer, we don't get the flu because we're out in the sun. What do you think?
Oh, it resonates with me. Like I haven't, read in detail, but I know there have been studies which linked the UV radiation with coronavirus. And it would be, very well established that when we look at the incidence of the, seasonal kind of acute respiratory tract infections, that there will be kind of this inverse curves. So as sun is going down, infections are kind of going up, and then like on the other side of the year you have the same. So when I think about flu, like typically flu basically comes after Christmas, and because there is a lag between the peak sunshine, so like the strongest UVB exposure, and the highest vitamin D concentration somebody has, like the lag is maybe 2 months. Because vitamin D is kind of, over, like when sun is abundant, is being accumulated and then it's slowly being diminished. So after New Year, that would be like when we normally see the lowest vitamin D levels, which tends to kind of coincide with the flu season. So,
it's amazing. We're gonna take a quick commercial break. When we come back, I want to go back into your paper, and I want to understand why the title of the paper was, further evidence that vitamin D protects against COVID-19 and death. What exactly was extrapolated from the paper that gives that title some credence? We're going to be right back with more of Dr. Lina Zgaga. Stay tuned. We shall return. Every day, there's a new wellness trend. Eat that, do this, avoid those. How do you know where to start or who to trust? Inside Tracker helps you cut through the noise by analyzing your blood, your DNA, your lifestyle, and your fitness tracker to provide you with a science-backed, trackable action plan on how to live, age, and perform better. Personalized, one-size-fits-one recommendations to help you optimize you. For a limited time, Inside Tracker is offering Superhuman Radio listeners 25% off the entire store. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Inside Tracker, INSIDETRACKER, to save 25% off. Change begins on the inside. Is there something interfering with your happiness or ability to achieve your goals? BetterHelp can help. They will assess your needs and match you with a licensed therapist. This is not a self-help or crisis line. It's professional counseling done securely online. They have a broad range of experts and are available worldwide without having to wait in an uncomfortable waiting room. Get the help you need and start living a happier life today. Go to shrnetwork.biz/BetterHelp. That's BETTER, HELP, and receive 10% off your first month of counseling when you use the code SHR. Vitamin D3. Knoll Creek Hemp Company's Delta 8 soft chews are the premier Delta 8 product on the market today. Knoll Creek's Delta 8 is produced from high-quality hemp-derived CBD oil, and soft chews are manufactured using proprietary nano-emulsification technique that ensures the Delta 8 soft chew will timely deliver the desired effects cleanly and consistently from piece to piece. In a space where at least 70% of the products fail to meet label claims and where most users of conventional hemp products are left disappointed, Knoll Creek's Delta 8 soft chews are a product you can trust. Visit shrnetwork.biz/Delta8, that's DELTA and the number 8, and use the code SHR20 to get 20% off your first order today. I would easily say that I am the hugest proponent you will ever meet to doing anything that will improve the quality of my sleep. And that's because sleep is linked to just about every metabolic disorder we see in our population today. One of the easiest things you can do to improve the quality of your sleep is to get a pillow that can be shaped into the exact form factor that allows you to get your best night's sleep. And that is MyPillow. I've been sleeping with MyPillow for a few years now, and I can tell you that when I have to travel and stay in hotels, I don't get a good night's sleep because I don't have MyPillow with me. Right now, you can save up to 60% off of everything offered to improve the quality of your sleep at shrnetwork.biz/MyPillow when you use the code SHR. Or you can call toll-free 800-889-4938. And remember to use code SHR to save up to 60% off of everything at their website. Remember those rectangular toaster pastries you used to love when you were a kid? Well, Legendary Foods has just made them better. The new cake-style tasty pastry is like nothing you've ever had before. With 20 grams of high-quality protein and less than 1 gram of sugar, you'll feel like you're cheating, but you're not. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use the code SHR10 to save 10% off your purchase of tasty pastries. Now available in cookies and cream, red velvet cake, birthday cake, blueberry, strawberry, brown sugar cinnamon, and hot fudge sundae. Go to shrnetwork.biz/legendary and use code SHR10 today.
This is the Superhuman Channel, doing reps with the weight of the world.
Welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Lina Zgaga. She is a professor at Trinity University in Dublin, Ireland. So your paper says further evidence vitamin D protects from COVID-19 and death. I'm paraphrasing. I know it was a little bit longer than that, but we couldn't fit it all on the different platforms. Why did you say this?
So we investigated 2 different outcomes. So there is the COVID risk, which kind of means, are you more likely to get an infection, yes or no? And then the other is disease severity and death. So they're kind of separate. And, we can assume that they, maybe the impact of vitamin D might be the same, but in a way we don't know before we test it. So we kind of wanted to provide as strong evidence as was possible. So we felt that we kind of, built on what was already there to provide something new. And what was new is that we used the genetically predicted vitamin D status as something, that is robust. Person basically has the same genetically predicted vitamin D status from the moments, they're conceived until the end. Yeah. So it could kind of be something comparable, which is not confounded by their lifestyle, where they live, and like all the other things. But then like other groups would have done that as well. But the new bit of our research was to include sunlight. So the new bit of our research was to, in addition to using genetically predicted vitamin D status, that we also used sunshine predicted vitamin D status. And then we can use them together. And the reason why that's important is because obviously there's many genes, and many genes are, linked to vitamin D status. And some of those genes will be on the dermal synthesis pathway. So some of those genes are the genes that basically, convert sunshine effectively into vitamin D. And it was previously reported that the heritability of vitamin D status is different in summer and in winter. So in winter, genes explained most of your vitamin D status. So we could kind of, rank individuals, are they kind of, more likely to be vitamin D deficient or not based on their genes. But in the summertime, when sunshine was so abundant, genes became much less important because they were like, completely
Exposure. Yeah.
Overtaken by that. So we wanted to kind of take both together to see what happens with COVID. So I guess the bottom line of the paper is that we didn't find evidence that would link vitamin D in the way we investigated it with COVID risk, but we did find that UVB predicted, so sunshine predicted vitamin D level was very strongly linked with severe disease and hospitalizations. Now, obviously, every study has limitations. So for us, we used UK Biobank, which would be absolutely amazing resource, which included 500,000 individuals from the UK.
Mm-hmm.
But the data that we had was for the first 3 months of the pandemic. And during the first 3 months of the pandemic, the testing in UK wasn't, very widespread. So mostly testing was reserved for individuals who were in hospital, which basically meant that we didn't have as accurate data on risk. So are you more likely to get COVID, yes or no? And we did have pretty strong data on the severity and disease. So, now we would like to kind of repeat the study and use 1.5 years of data, if it was possible.
There was a good study we talked about last year from Israel. I had the author on the show that they compiled data just from their own population of vitamin D status, infection rates, and severity. And they came out and said vitamin D was protective, and the higher your vitamin D levels. Now, they didn't look at supplementation or they just looked at 25 OHD exclusively, which I think part of the problem with a lot of the vitamin D3 research, in my humble opinion, is we have this false narrative that D3 is fat soluble. It's very dangerous, which is, I don't know why that old wives' tale took flight, but so anytime we see D3 research, they're giving people 400 IUs, 800 IUs, and it's like this is nothing. You produce more in an hour in the sun than that. So why don't we give real expected physiological doses of vitamin D3? And they don't, because they feel that taking anything higher than that is somehow risky. Doesn't that frustrate you that there isn't a larger body of research to look at logical doses of D3 and outcomes?
Definitely. Yeah. So it kind of goes back to the personalized, approach. So the research question that you would really want to answer is, are people who are taking vitamin D dose that's optimal for them, are they protected against disease in question? Yeah, because obviously for, if individuals are taking dose that doesn't move the needle for their vitamin D status, like that research, like before it even started, it had no chance of giving us anything useful.
Right.
Yeah. So you kind of want to know, if you kind of really chose your dose in the best possible way, would that matter? Now, obviously, that's complicated. And I guess, when randomized controlled trials are done, they have to be safe. But I would agree with you that, the perception of safety, in my opinion, the way how it's presented is a little bit out of sync with the evidence. So like you really, you need to kind of have very special set of circumstances to have vitamin D doses, that we are discussing now. So 2, 3, or 5,000, to show that that's harmful. So the ideal thing would be to kind of have an algorithm where we can calculate what's optimal for somebody. But now all of that is again complicated by the fact that we don't have an agreement. How will we say what the optimal status is?
Right.
So,
and it's going to be hard to do that because the pharmaceutical agenda has created a one-size-fits-all approach to medicine, and so they don't want to be to the pharmaceutical industry. If they had to calculate and alternate dosing based on every patient, their whole business model just is out the window, because they want to make one pill, 50 milligrams, everybody gets it, and that's it. And one of the other points that you made off the air and that you alluded to a couple minutes ago is that you can't do research on vitamin D truly on orally dosed vitamin D, unless you keep people in a cave for 60 days where they get no residual sun exposure whatsoever, driving to work, riding their bicycle, gardening, because like you said before, if they give someone an antidepressant, it's not like they're going to come in contact with more of that antidepressant in their environment and somehow the numbers will be skewed. But if you give someone vitamin D, some people may be in the sun, some people may not. And now you have confounding information. It's like, why did it work for that person, not this person? Oh, wait a minute. They're producing more vitamin D than that person because they're out in the sun all the time.
I think that the two things which are in a way sabotaging vitamin D research, one is confounding and two is noise. So confounding is a problem for all observational studies. So for example, the study you mentioned in Israel, where they measured vitamin D status, like that sounds like it's a great study. So you have people, you measure their vitamin D status and you check whether they developed infection or not. But if you were to look closely, probably, those who were older had lower vitamin D and more likely to get infection. Those who were obese will be, vitamin D deficient and disease. So it's like, it's impossible to disentangle like what's causing, the final outcome. So the only way that we now know how we can, prove that something is causal is by doing a randomized control trial. But what I was mentioning to you earlier is that, in my opinion, randomized control trials don't work for vitamin D. And the reason is that the vitamin D that you get in the trial isn't the only vitamin D you're getting.
Right.
So both placebo and control groups, like they will obviously both have vitamin D. And within each group, some individuals will have more vitamin D and some individuals will have less vitamin D.
I mean, imagine the somebody in the placebo group, right? But they're an avid cyclist. So they go out every day and ride their bicycle. And then people go, oh, wow, he didn't get the disease and we didn't give him the vitamin D, but he's getting vitamin D out in the world every day. I know.
And things are kind of being worsened by the fact that, it's unethical. So in your trial, it's unethical to include individuals who are severely vitamin D deficient, because when you're preparing your trial, if you kind of discover that somebody is severely vitamin D deficient, you must, improve their vitamin D status, and they're no more eligible to participate in your trial.
Right.
And what this means is that we are basically taking out those who would benefit most before the study even began. So then in the trial, we are kind of left with individuals who are a little bit vitamin D deficient or those who are vitamin D sufficient. But it's not reasonable to expect that those who already have high levels of vitamin D, it's not reasonable to expect that there will be any further improvement with, as you say, often very small trial vitamin D dose that they're getting.
I would also love to see a study done on the adverse effects of the current vaccine and vitamin D status. And here's why. We did a show with Jean Tremblay about 4 weeks ago about the effects of the peptide LL37, which is a metabolite of vitamin D3, but you can inject it. You can buy it and inject it yourself. And I do. I use LL37 periodically. And the study showed that the LL37 peptide has the ability to A, cloak the spike protein, and B, block the ACE receptor simultaneously, conveying protection against. You could still get infected, but you won't get any symptoms. You just won't feel sick. You won't even know you're infected. And a lot of people who are having bad outcomes from, I have some theories. First of all, they're not aspirating when they give this vaccine. They just stick it in and push it in. So you don't know. Some people, like I have a nice big thick shoulder. So chances of you hitting a blood vessel is probably harder than someone whose shoulder is very narrow and all of the blood vessels are crowded into some small area. And when you inject that into a blood vessel, it gets distributed systemically and instead of staying localized as it's supposed to stay. And so the spike protein travels around to the lungs, to the heart, to the brain. But the other thing that I'm wondering now, because of this discussion, is I would love to see the vitamin D status in individuals who had adverse outcomes to the vaccine, because it stands to reason. If D3 can protect against the replication and damage done by the virus, and the vaccine has some portion of the virus, it has the spike protein in there, then theoretically the vitamin D3 levels could protect against potential adverse reactions to the vaccine. You have any opinions on that?
I haven't been thinking about that. Something that crossed my world was a study that looked at the vaccine response and vitamin D status. So in a way, kind of showing that those who have better vitamin D status also have better vaccine response. But like I wouldn't kind of know more than that.
Yeah, but I would love to see that. We have to take our last commercial break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Superhuman Radio and Professor Lina Zgaga. We'll be right back. Redcon One's new BAR bar is the ultimate soft-baked protein-packed snack bar, powered by peanut butter. Perfect for while on the go to help curb hunger or sneaky sweet tooth cravings. With 20 grams of protein, use as a meal replacement bar or when you're in need of a high-protein snack. Eat a Redcon One bar as a midday snack or for fuel before an intense training session. Go to shrnetwork.biz/Redcon1 and use the code SHR25 and save 25% off these delicious bars today. Have you been struggling to achieve results in the gym? Trouble sleeping through the night? Overwhelmed with stress or anxiety? Look no further than Infiniwell supplements. They have designed products to address specific needs like muscle growth, hormone balance, sleep, and anxiety from the first use. Infiniwell helps you live well. Go to shrnetwork.biz/bewell, that's BEWELL, and use code SHR20 and start living well today. If there is one mineral you should be worried about not getting enough of, it's magnesium. Magnesium is the body's master mineral, powering over 300 critical reactions, including detoxification, fat metabolism, energy, and even digestion is influenced by the presence of magnesium. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about a new magnesium product I've been taking now called Magnesium Breakthrough. It's the ultimate magnesium supplement, easily the best I've ever seen or experienced. With all 7 forms of magnesium, I was able to arrange an amazing deal for my audience, and I guarantee it's the best deal available on this product. Seriously, with volume discounts combined with our custom 10% coupon code SHR10, you can save up to 40% off select packages of Magnesium Breakthrough. And I promise that this deal is only available on this specific website, magbreakthrough.com/SHR. You won't find that deal on Amazon or even on the company's own website. Go to magbreakthrough.com/SHR and use code SHR10 to save up to 40% off select packages of Magnesium Breakthrough.
New Mass Pro Synthogen X2 just upped its own legendary game. To distance itself even further from the rest of the pack, Synthogen X2 now has double the key active ingredients. If you've ever wondered what steroid-like recovery feels like, Synthogen X2 delivers. See why others compare it favorably to powerful bodybuilding drugs at synthogen.com. Mass Pro Synthogen. When you train with it, you'll gain with it.
Being superhuman means being conscientious about the choices we make. White Oak Pastures is superhuman when it comes to raising livestock. They're committed to animal welfare, land regeneration, and rural revival. They responsibly manage the entire process from the pasture to your doorstep. High-quality, pasture-raised, great-tasting meat from a farm you can trust. Full nose-to-tail selections. They even have options for your pet. Go to shrnetwork.biz/whiteoak and use the code SUPERHUMAN to save 10% off your entire first order. Vitamin D3. I want to introduce you to Tau Patch, a heavily researched, patented wearable device that provides immediate and long-lasting health benefits. Tau Patch's nanocrystals convert your body heat into light of specific therapeutic frequencies that optimize your central nervous system. The health benefits of Tau Patch include relief from chronic pain, better sleep, increased focus, reduced stress, improved athletic performance, and more. Discover what it can do for you by visiting shrnetwork.biz/Tau Patch. That's TAOPATCH. Use code SHR for your superhuman discount today.
You're listening to the Superhuman Channel. We're ripped and we're ready.
Welcome back. We have some comments. Jim Slade says, I've been taking high-dose vitamin D for years. I'm pretty sure I remember hearing about this on SHR years ago. Yeah, I've been talking about vitamin D for a decade or maybe longer. I think it was STOS therapy. I'm not sure what STOS therapy was. I apologize for that. Gave the subject 10,000 per kilogram. Oh, so STOS therapy gave a subject 10,000 IUs per kilogram without toxicity. Yeah, the toxicity in vitamin D and vitamin A, quite frankly, is highly, highly overestimated. And we see this, you know, when we see hunter-gatherers who spend all day in the sun, granted their skin is dark, but they're producing hundreds of thousands of IUs of vitamin D in their skin. And that brings me to another topic. Dr. Stephanie Seneff, who's brilliant, MIT scientist, came on my show numerous times. One of the times she came on my show, we talked about vitamin D, and she said that her research showed there's a potential for greater benefits from the sulfated form of vitamin D3, which happens in, you know, cholecalciferol, and there's pre-vitamin D, and there's also sulfated that's all produced in the skin. Now, the longer you stay in the sun, the more that's actually destroyed before it gets delivered. So there's feedback between the liver, 25-OHD levels, and the skin. But the sulfated version, she said, is never destroyed. And she thinks that the sulfated version of vitamin D, which you don't get in a supplement, is actually more valuable. Have you seen anything on cholecalciferol sulfate?
It's very interesting. I actually did not. So I think it has been a long while since I heard something about vitamin D that I didn't know before. So I actually wrote it down and will look into it. I didn't hear before. The point about hunter-gatherers, so there are kind of a couple of recent studies which looked at tribes who are living in Africa, and they're living, you know, the way we used to all live a couple of thousand years ago. And they would be having levels around 150 nanomoles per liter. So we take that as something, you know, it couldn't possibly be that means too much, right? So like, you know, 150 like should be within kind of safe if that's what we're finding in populations who are kind of fully kind of regulating it kind of through the feedback loop.
There's a study we talked about probably 9-10 years ago about in the discussion of vitamin D3, and Southern Africans very rarely get skin cancer that live in Southern Africa. But when they move to the United States, they become affluent doctors, lawyers, and professionals. They develop a high rate of skin cancer. Now, this is counterintuitive. You live in Southern Africa, you're up there by the equator, you're exposed to massive amounts of sunlight, and there's a very low rate of skin cancer. You move to the United States, we're further from the equator, there's less exposure to sunlight, and they get skin cancer, which was when I started to review literature. Actually, it was the protective effects of nutrients to skin cancer. So there's things like astaxanthin, vitamin A, real vitamin A, retinol, retinol palmitate, retinoic acid. They literally protect you from getting skin cancer in sun exposure. And I thought, well, wait a minute. If something I can eat makes its way into my skin and can protect me from skin cancer, then isn't it logical that something I can eat makes its way into my skin and could lead to skin cancer? And it baffles me that scientists don't deductively go, wait a minute, if we can protect against skin cancer, then we must be causing skin cancer. And that's why I say the sun is an unwilling participant. And I've done 2 shows just on this topic about skin cancer and sun exposure, but that's a completely different topic.
I've actually looked at the relationship between kind of lifelong sun exposure in UK and linked it with various different cancers. And, you know, like the simple way of looking at it is if you look at UK, obviously the northern bits would be less sunshine and the southern kind of more sunshine. And what we found was that kind of over lifetime, that if you were exposed to more sunshine, you were less likely to develop prostate, colorectal, lung cancer. And that was kind of sensible.
Right.
Or, that wouldn't be that much of, but
Right.
you were also less likely to develop skin cancer. And like that would be opposite to what you can find in the literature. Yeah. So more sunshine, more vitamin D, low risk of colorectal, prostate, lung cancer, and also low risk of skin cancer. And that would be kind of counterintuitive because, like most common literature would link sun cancer with skin cancer. And the way we explain that is that there is a difference between your kind of, exposure to sunshine at place of residence versus sun exposure when you kind of travel somewhere for, a holiday or outside of your normal place of residence.
Right. Yoko Yukio posted a quote from a Dr. Anthony Morris, who is former chief of vaccine control officer for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. It says that he's quoted as saying that these vaccines are worthless. I don't know that they're worthless. People think I'm an anti-vax person. I'm not. I'm an anti-force me to have a vaccine person for sure. But the origins of vaccines have very legitimate beginnings. During the Black Plague, they were able to find people who survived, scrape their pustules, scrape your arm, open up a wound, put it in there. You got a fever for a couple of days, and then you were protected. So hormesis, or the hormetic effects of a little bit, the dose is in the poison is in the dose. A little bit makes you stronger and resistant is legitimate. The problem is the commercialization of vaccines has added things to it that have nothing to do with the conveyance of resistance and everything to do to make them shelf stable and last 5 years. So you can take 16 injections out of that bottle and inject 16 people with it. And then they started adding adjuvants. And that is really where the mistake is. Adjuvants cause widespread initiation of an immune response, not just to the thing that you're injecting in them, but everything that they come in contact with for the next few days. And it's estimated, we had a brilliant scientist from the UK on the show 3 or 4 years ago who showed that peanut allergies are coming from the vaccines that children are being given in very youthful age. And he was very convincing. He showed that where peanut allergy started and where the vaccination started and where they started putting peanut protein in the vaccines as an adjuvant. And now we have children who, if they eat a peanut, they asphyxiate. And so I'm not an anti-vax guy. I'm an anti-force me to get a vax guy for sure, number one. But number two, I'm against what the pharmaceutical industry has done to profit from vaccines, to make them shelf stable and commercialize them, that we don't need for the vaccine to be effective, but they need to be able to profit from it. That's where I am. So that's it. What do you hope lay people and clinicians take away from your research, Professor Zgaga?
Well, vitamin D is cheap, safe, and available. There is lots and lots and lots of evidence to suggest that vitamin D is, hugely beneficial for a variety of our systems and prevents against a variety of diseases. So it's really bad to be vitamin D deficient. Now, we are lacking the ultimate evidence. So, conventional medicine finds evidence from randomized controlled trials to be this kind of pinnacle. So if randomized controlled trial finds that it works, that means it works, and end of story. But if randomized controlled trial fails to show benefit, that's the end of story.
Right.
And in context of vitamin D, we had a lot of negative trials. So trials that fail to show benefit. So the kind of second point that I'd like to make is that when we have this null finding, there can be two reasons why we have null finding. One, that the truth is that the thing is not beneficial. But the alternative explanation is that this is a false negative finding, which means that the benefit is there, but that we failed to prove it. Mm-hmm. And based on my research in vitamin D, which at this stage would be quite extensive, I feel that we have lots of reasons to believe that the way we are trying to get this ultimate evidence just isn't
the right way.
Isn't the right way forward. So further research is needed, but I kind of hope that we develop trials that will be able to really assess the benefits of vitamin D.
Did some of the people in your study actually have ultraviolet lamps that they were exposed to? Did I read that right? No. Okay.
No, we were using ambient vitamin D, ambient ultraviolet violation.
But you know what? We used to have sun lamps that had UV, and then they made us get rid of them. They said, "Oh no, it's dangerous to the skin. It causes skin cancer." I mean, if everybody had a sun lamp at home that had that put out UVA and UVB, and they weren't eating crap food that's going to lead to skin cancer, we would benefit from that during the winter months. In fact, maybe I'll look for one for myself.
Yeah. I mean, the UV wavelengths that can induce vitamin D synthesis, they're very narrow. So, UVB part of spectrum is quite narrow, and then the band that can make vitamin D is like really kind of pointy. So it's like very specific bandwidth that can do it. So when we were doing our study, out of the entire solar spectrum, we filtered only for this kind of tiny fraction of solar spectrum that can make vitamin D, which kind of then makes our, exposure measure more specific. So we kind of hope that would then be strengthening the evidence.
How does cloud cover affect that? Like, so when there's direct sunlight, we're getting everything. When there's cloud cover, we're getting some of the rays. Are we still getting the rays that produce vitamin D, even if there's cloud cover? It's
hugely weakened. So first of all, when we look at the day, obviously in the morning it's weak, at midday it's the strongest, and then kind of towards the evening it kind of goes back down. So there'll be this kind of curve during the day, and then even the tiniest cloud would very much impact the dose of radiation that can kind of impact vitamin D level. But there are ways how we can kind of compress satellite data that's getting the cloud information and the ozone layer and like a variety of other things to kind of get us the dose which reaches the surface of the planet, which we then kind of link with outcomes.
And remember, folks, the genius of Bill Gates, he wants to block the sun. Just remember that. Sometimes giving people too much money is a bad idea when they're not critical thinkers. Listen, I want to thank you for being on the show, Dr. Zgaga. Please, I love your information, and I hope you'll come back sometime.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Take care. And that's it for today. I know we have a show tomorrow. I don't remember what it is because I haven't looked at it, to be honest with you. I'm not good at looking at tomorrow. I have so many challenges today. I don't know those of you who watched the show yesterday, but we had this horrible buzzing and ticking noise going on. It was so annoying. I had to swap out a computer today, and in swapping it out, several things didn't work, and I'm not a tech guy. I'm really not. I hate that stuff. But I had to get under the desk here and move equipment, and so we're back up and running, and I'm happy about that. But I don't know what tomorrow's show is about. All right, so look, but we do have a show tomorrow, so hope you tune in, and don't forget to share this show. People can supplement with vitamin D all by themselves. They don't need their doctor to prescribe it, and vitamin D conveys so much protection, so much. And you don't have to get crazy. You don't have to get 100 nanograms a milliliter or whatever the scale is. I mean, mine is usually in the 70s. I keep it there. That's where I like it. It takes me 15,000 IUs a day to keep it in the 70s. For you, maybe 5,000 IUs. But everybody should be supplementing with vitamin D, in my opinion. And I'm not a doctor, so they can't threaten to take anything away from me. Okay, that's it for today. See you tomorrow. Share the show. Thank you.